This is Global Tel-Link. You have a prepaid call from
Silas Johnson.
an inmate at the Centinela State Prison, Centinela, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel-Link.
So on the last conversation we had, you had mentioned that your dad was, I think you used the word big statured,
Yeah.
or he was imposing a figure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he just had to give you that look, and
Yeah. Go ahead, guys.
yeah, he would give you that look, and you knew when he gave you that look, you know what time it was, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't take much with him. Didn't take much.
But those looks could only they would only work while he was in your presence. Once you were out of his presence, things change, right?
Right. Quickly. Once I got around my friends, once I got around all my little buddies and, all the ego and, all the bravado took over and, yeah, what he said went out one ear and right out the other.
So you mentioned that on your last case, you weren't fortunate enough to go home. You ended up spending some time in juvenile hall in camp, I believe.
Yeah.
Let me ask you: do you remember what your first day getting to juvenile hall? What were your thoughts that were running through your head? Were you anxious? Did you have butterfly in your stomach? Were you terrified? What was going through your mind? When they were processing you, fingerprinting you, taking your picture, drawing your blood, going through all those motions.
I can remember having anxiety. I wasn't the biggest dude. I'm 5'10" now, so I guess maybe I was 5'9" at the time, and I was a slim kid. I was a little kid, and yeah. So there was definitely a lot of anxiety. But I also thought I was a pretty tough kid too. I'd been in a few fights, and I figured I could handle myself, and so I was I had anxiety, but I felt like I could handle it.
And this first trip to juvenile hall, you ended up in Sylmar?
Yeah, Sylmar. Yeah,
And
Sylmar's the only juvenile hall I'd ever gone to.
so you end up in Sylmar Juvenile Hall. You have a few court dates before you sent to camp?
Yeah, probably two or three maybe. Couple, maybe, but from there, probably two, yeah, couple.
And in contrast, how is camp compared to Sylmar Juvenile Hall?
I guess camp, juvenile hall is it's a transient environment. So, there are a lot of moving around to different units, different buildings. People are coming and going because you don't have kids that are going to actually do a camp program, so they may get arrested and they may be doing a 2-week Ricardo M sentence and get kicked back to the streets. I guess it would be kind of like the difference between the county jail for youth and prison for adults. So after I got sentenced to camp, I went to Challenger, which is right next to Lancaster Prison, and that place is like a prison. It's like it seemed like a prison. It's walls off, like so. Yeah, once you arrive there, you realize that like this is serious. This is serious. You ain't just going home. There are gang members here who are in conflict with each other. And so, this is, it's time to get it on.
And right now that you mentioned Silmar and Challenger, a few thoughts popped into my mind.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
The first one is, do you recall being transported from Silmar up to Challenger? What was the experience like? Were you handcuffed, shackled, your arms, your feet? Were you handcuffed to a ward, or how many people were on the chains? Did they belly chain you? What was the exact transportation method that they used? And then my second question would be, once you got to Challenger, did you go directly to the camp that you were gonna start your first phase on, or did you end up in I believe there were some units. I'm not sure if it was called reception, right next to the shoe or to the box or whatever it was, whatever they call it in juvenile hall. And what camp did you end up in?
Okay, so as far as the transportation, it's like a van, and we were handcuffed, and we were sitting next to it was one person that you were sitting next to, and so we drove through Angeles Forest up there to Lancaster. Once I got there, I went to essentially the reception. It was Smith and Scobie right next to each other, and I was in Scobie, and you had Resnick back right next door. So there were three: Smith, Scobie, and Resnick. And then there was a huge yard, and then across from there was the education, and on the other side you had McNair, Onizuka, and the other camps, 3 different units over there. Actually back then, Resnick, the girls were there, so when we were in day room, we could see the girls running around on the yard back then. And I eventually, so this was pretty much reception, and I stayed there a couple of weeks. I was actually there during the Northridge quake in '94, and which was a trip. And a couple of weeks later, I got bussed in on like it was, I guess like a school bus, pretty much what I remember, but essentially like a juvenile prison bus. And I was bussed up to Camp Gonzalez in the Malibu Mountains. And that's where I did my time. I was in juvenile hall and in Challenger roughly a month and a half, and I did my last 6 months in Camp Gonzalez.
I just got a few thoughts right now. So the bus I think you're referring to, it's known as the Bluebird. It was a white bus, right?
Right.
Yeah, the Bluebird. It was the Bluebird. How do I remember that? and another a thing that I want to touch on before I forget again, because I forgot right after you mentioned it, that I don't think I've heard anybody ever talk about is Ricardo M. Can you elaborate on what Ricardo M time is?
Okay, so Ricardo M is, let's say, you get sentenced to community service, 100 hours community service. And in the LA Juvenile Probation Department, you have check-ins with your probation officer, but you also go to court for check-ins with your parent. So let's say you were assigned 100 hours, and you go a month later, and you haven't done it. Then the judge would admonish you, and this actually happened to me after I got out of camp. And you go back, and if you still haven't done that time that your community service or started it and done it, a significant portion towards finishing it, then they take you into custody. And Ricardo M time is when you get remanded to custody for not following the rules of your probation, and the sentences vary. And in my case, I had probation. I had probably 200 hours of community service that I was supposed to do. And I went, and they took us out, and we cut bushes for Caltrans, and like it was just back-breaking work all day in the Washington Granada Hills. And I went home and told my dad, yeah, that's not going to work. I'm going to do my 2 weeks. So when I went in, I went for my check-in. The judge was asking me about it, and my dad tried to speak up and say that I was gonna finish it up, and the judge was like, yeah, don't even worry about it. Take him into custody. And so I went and served 2 weeks. So Ricardo M is pretty much like I guess like a flash in the county jail. I guess that would be the equivalent now.
So right now that you mentioned the community service, I think if my memory doesn't fail me, I think it was referred to as JAWS, and it was like the worst. Like nobody, like they would give you, they could have given you, it could have been 50 hours. I mean, but as a kid, there's no way you're gonna be able to complete those hours. I don't know anybody that ever completed JAWS. They would just rather just do whatever days they needed to do. And when it came to sentencing for a juvenile, I think it was very limited on the options that there was. So it's either you were gonna go to camp, you were gonna go to YA, or you were going to go to Ricardo M. And Ricardo M, they could only sentence you for, it's a very limited amount of days that they could sentence you to. I think the most that they could sentence you to, but don't quote me on this, I believe it's 90 days. And then I think the other options were, like, there was the Boys Ranch, and there was also placement.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So as far as being in custody in the juvenile system, I think those were the only options that there was. So
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So once you get to Camp Gonzales, because Challenger is I believe is no it or it was when it was still open, it was considered a closed camp. Was
Right.
Camp Gonzales also a closed camp, or was that considered an open camp?
No, that was a closed camp. I mean, we had walls that's higher than the gates here at the prison that I'm at. Yeah, it was a closed camp. You had a Miller back then, which was an open camp where you could just pretty much walk away from it. You had Kilpatrick, which was like a sports camp. That was an open camp, but Camp Gonzales, that was a closed camp. There were walls that opened up a gate for cars to come in and open and close it, and yeah, so there was no escaping that unless you had a lot of ingenuity.
And another thought that came into my mind was, you mentioned that you ended up in Camp Scobie, right?
Yeah.
And in Resnick that there was females in Camp Resnick. I think by the time 97 came around, Resnick had converted over to a male facility, and Camp Scobie, I believe, was also, it was considered, it was a facility for juveniles that were on psych meds. Was it like that when you were there? Were there juveniles that were on psych meds, or was it just a regular camp?
No, at that time it was just a regular camp. It was just gang members and kids that were just gang members. That's it. And Smith, Scobie, and there were, like I said, they had the juvenile girls in Resnick. I think they're at Scott now, if I'm not mistaken. They're Scudder and Scott, I believe that.
In '98, I could confirm that Scott was it was a female camp, and Scudder was a male camp, which was adjacent to Scott. Also, Camp Smith was at that time, or in '97.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
It was for offenders that were violent. It was known as the VAP program, and they had been sentenced to camp for a year or more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I know our 60-second mark is gonna be short. If you want to go ahead and call me back, and then we could continue, and then I'll let you talk, because I've been interrupting you a lot.
No, you're fine. I'll let you right back.